Antonio Margarito has the victory he's been waiting for all his life.
That is a modern boxing classic.
Down goes Frazier! Down goes Frazier! Down goes Frazier!
Should be the round of the century.
Look at Holyfield. What a warrior.
If he weighs 205, his heart weighs about 204.
It happened. It happened.
I can't believe it.
That was astonishing, and he hurts him with a hook. Corrales comes back a straight right. Now Castillo against the ropes. Unbelievable. Epic flow. Corrales swinging. Castillo's in trouble. Lee steps in, and the fight is over. Corrales with a remarkable dramatic turnaround to win this fight.
If he gets up, he probably wins the fight. I can't believe it!
Unbelievable! Richard Steele stopped the fight with 5 seconds to go. You're going to watch Lou Duva go crazy now. You're going to watch Lou Duva go absolutely berserk.
Well, hello Boxing Asylum listeners and welcome to another Punches from the Past, where we delve into the historical archives and talk about the fights that mattered. I'm Steve Wellings once again, and for this special show I'm joined by Mr. Andy Patterson, Kurt Ward and Dave Lee. Don't forget you can find our previous shows over on Tumblr, iTunes and directly through the Facebook page. We've already covered the two bouts between De La Hoya Mosley, the Luis Klitschko, Nelson Sanchez, and last week we covered Jamie Moore versus Ryan Rhodes. But this week we're going to travel over to July the 26th, 2008 in a classic Mexican-Puerto Rican battle between Miguel Cotto and Antonio Margarito in the MGM Grand Las Vegas. Cotto, the Bob Arum starlet, with a 32-0 record against the dangerous, controversial Mexican Margarito. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our resident big fight expert, Mr. Andy Patterson, now to give us his opening insight leading into this WBA welterweight title encounter. Andy, take it away.
Sure, Steve. As you know, Margarito was the number 4 ranked Ring Magazine welterweight contender in the world. Floyd Mayweather was still ranked as the lineal champion at that time. Cotto, I think, was number 1. Or ranked number 1, sorry, and Margarito, as you say, was number 4. Now, it's another instalment, obviously, the Mexico-Puerto Rico rivalry, dating back to 1934 when Escobar defeated Baby Casanova and became the first Puerto Rican champion, or world champion. It was an eagerly anticipated fight. Cotto, obviously coming up through the ranks, he made 6 defences, his WBO 140-pound title before he faced against Carlos Quintana. Margarito, you know, as we all know, he had his bout with WBO champion against Daniel Santos, which ended in a no contest due to a bad cut. You know, it's just the way that Cotto came up, you know, a blue chip prospect, so to speak. Really, well, decent amateur. Really came into the professional ranks, really kind of like blowing, you know, or cutting a swathe through the ranks, as it so to speak. Until he made love more than Ndu, and obviously Ndu's obviously a kind of solid operator, decent chin. Then obviously cutting through Bailey, who was obviously a big puncher, DeMarcus Corley, you know, and then obviously had that tough fight with Ricardo Torres, which is probably one of my favourite Cotto fights, just to see him kind of like dig deep and it shows what he's made of. Jalanko Branco, and I think he's still obviously kicking around nowadays. Paulie Malignaggi that he really gave a beat down on. And then obviously that was when they move up to welterweight, and he faced off Quintana, Urkel. And he did have the opportunity to fight Antonio Margarito back in the 9th of June 2007. For whatever reason, Margarito knocked the fight back. Some people say that Floyd Mayweather ducked Antonio Margarito for something like between $5 and $8 million. You know, a lot of Floyd fans will dispute that. So really, over that course of time, I think Margarito even lost Paul Williams at that time. So it really did put jeopardise the unification fight, because he was, as I say, Margarito was WBO champion at that time. So obviously Cotto goes on, he basically destroys Judah in a really good competitive fight, and then does really well, especially early doors in the fight against Shane Mosley. I really did think that was his, basically he was really knocking on the door at pound for pound at that time, my personal opinion. Off the Alfonso Gomez fight, Gomez was probably more a kind of light welterweight, maybe even a lightweight. But going into the Margarito fight, everybody in the sport, the press, the bookies, everybody really did think this was going to be a blood and guts battle. It was promising violence, and it's as it transpired, actually, that's exactly what we got.
I think, Kurt, as Andy mentions there, great breakdown. I'd never really minded Cotto, as I was saying off air. I really enjoyed his early rise on the big fight undercards, the Torres fight, Kelson Pinto, even way back to Justin Duco in 2002. Wouldn't go so far as to call myself a fan of Cotto, but I didn't mind him. And Bob Arum was obviously building him up to be a huge prospect. He took him out as part of the big publicity campaign for this fight to Las Vegas to help try and build the Cotto brand and to introduce his name and his style and his way of fighting to a new set of fans, not just the guys who'd been following him. Actually, in the lead-up, Andy mentioned there the Alfonso Gomez fight. Cotto smashed the life out of Gomez. That was on the 12th of April in New Jersey. And, of course, Margarito had also done his own bit of smashing against Kermit Cintron on the same venue, on the same night. It's not an eliminator as such, but it was just to build it up. And they both got through those various tests, and then that made the fight in July all the more appetising and possible. Kurt, sorry.
Yeah, and obviously both run great runs, as you mentioned. Cotto was unbeaten, and Margarito, 2 knockouts over Cintron. I know he had a close, but a win over Cotto. The Paul Williams fight, I mean, there was no shame in losing. I mean, he didn't really have to take that fight, I suppose, but it was a good fight, and Williams obviously really was getting a lot of hype then, especially after he won that fight. But I think going into it, it looked as a fight that Cotto should win. Margaret was obviously going to give him a tough time, but we all knew what he was like. He was slow, but he came forward. He plodded forward, there to be hit. But Cotto, being the better boxer, the guy that Top Rank really had high hopes for, and he get you in over Margarito, give you a tough fight, give the fans a good fight, and then move on to your Pacquiao and those type of guys. But Margarito, he had a few losses. He had a long career because he's a lot of Mexicans. He started early, but a dangerous guy, and a guy that was so big at the weight, just like Paul Williams who fought. And Cotto going in, the big question was if he couldn't hurt Margarito, when we know that a lot of people won't be able to hurt him. If you can't hurt him or get his respect, how is his gas tank going to hold down the 12 rounds if he has to go there? And can Margarito impose himself on him? And even though Cotto would have been expected to get the win, that was the danger for him. And as we'll talk about the fight, he started off well in it, but yeah, I mean, a great fight to make. And when I watched it, for the first time in a few years again, I mean, it's a fight that I just don't think ever gets old. Both guys really showed at times really brilliant moments, and I think whether you like Cotto or you hate Margaret or whatever, I think full respect to both guys. I mean, both guys took a lot of punishment. They came forward, they landed big shots, and as Max Kellerman said, it's a modern boxing classic without a doubt.
I always been a big Cotto fan. Going back to when I first saw him, Steve, you mentioned there Justin Juco. I think that was on the undercard of the second fight between Marco Antonio Barrero and Eric Morales. And even then, you could see, he just had star quality, didn't he? He just oozed class, everything he did. I think Top Rank brought him up well as well. They give him, they served him, a good apprenticeship against the usual names, like the Love Morin Dudes, Victoriano Socio, guys like that. I always thought that Cotto just oozed class all throughout, even like as in his early days as a prospect. And to be perfectly honest, at the time I wasn't Margarito's biggest fan. I mean, he had the tagline of like the world's most avoided boxer, and that kind of was being thrown about a bit. But I don't think at that time period his CV really justified it. I mean, the Sergio Martinez win is eye-catching now, but at the time Martinez was very green boxer. No one knew a lot about him. He wasn't really highly thought of. Aside from that, he had some good wins against B-level fighters like Antonio Diaz, Josh Cloddy we mentioned, who I think he might have damaged his hand early on, if I remember.
Yeah, I was going to say that, Dave. Wasn't Clotty doing really well for the first 4 or 5 rounds? He was laying it onto Margarito, and then he
first
broke
4
his
or
hand.
5 rounds. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I think
His
first
hand
4
on
or 5
shoulder, didn't
rounds.
he?
I think it was his hand, Kurt. He might have broke his knuckles. I'm trying to remember though. I think he broke his knuckles.
I think he
and
broke his
after
right
that,
hand, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he broke it, but I think there was definitely knuckle damage. And after that, Margarito took over. Cloddy's a good fighter, but there might be more to that fight than meets the eye. He beat Margarito beat was it Six Heads Lewis, who was never all that, to be honest.
No.
And he had the 2 wins, as you mentioned, against Kermit Cintron. And good wins, but Cintron, probably one of the mentally weakest champions.
His head
in
was
modern
away,
history.
wasn't it? Yeah.
And any time Cintron was faced with any kind of resistance, he seemed to crumble. I mean, we all remember his infamous dive out of the ring.
Yeah.
It's embarrassing.
Cotto was really his biggest fight. The Cotto fight was the one that was really going to make or break for him. That was like the high risk, high reward fight.
Easily, Andy. Yeah, I mean, when you take away those names that I mentioned there, I think there was a lot of very average wins on Margarita's ledger, which didn't really justify the world's most avoided boxer tagline. I mean, when he beat that Hercules dude, I mean, that was such a gross mismatch that Larry Merchant actually had to apologize to the viewers after broadcasting that fight. I mean, that's how bad a mismatch that was.
Hercules, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, was it
the Sebastian Lujan fight where Lujan's ear looked like it had been run through by a chainsaw or something?
I think that was the Margarito fight. Yeah. That was one of the worst injuries you'll see in boxing. and then in the rematch against Daniel Santos, I mean, he fought Santos the first time. I think that ended in a no contest in the first round. Their styles that was made for a sloppy fight, but in the rematch, Santos at times actually made Margarito look like somewhat of a novice. I'm not exaggerating too much. I mean, he couldn't work Santos out at all, and I think he was actually hurt at one point too. Now, we've seen Santos over here. I'm sure you remember Santos, Steve. I mean, against the likes of Takaloo and of course Neil Sinclair. Sinclair dropped him as well. I mean, the guy was average at best, and I thought Margarito, if he was this elite level fighter, should have been dealing with the likes of him. I know I was up at a higher weight, light middleweight, and I think he dropped back down shortly after. But at the time, I thought Margarito was being overhyped, and I was full sure that Cotto was going to hand his arse to him. But shows what I know.
Yeah, I think I'd be maybe not as harsh on Margarito. I think whenever I look down his box record, the amount of 4 and 5 gold stars. Now I know BoxRec isn't the be all and end all when it comes to this, but I think there's a fair few names on it, and guys, maybe, Antonio Diaz was decent enough. Cavellas obviously turned out to be pretty poor. Lujan pretty bang average, and Cintron, but he did sort of go in with everybody, and he wasn't afraid to mix it up with Cotto and what have you. But
I think what the point I'm trying to make is, and I think Andy said as well. I mean, this was leading into the Cotto fight. I mean, this was by far this was his litmus test. I think Diaz, Lewis, these guys, Cintron, good fighters, but just under the elite level banner. I mean, remember Antonio Diaz having a back and forth war with Mickey Ward. I mean, that was the likes of, that was Diaz's level. Cotto was a whole nother level, and it remained to be seen for me anyway that Margarito could compete at that level. And obviously, look, he put egg on my face. He absolutely belonged to that level. I'm just talking about prior to the Cotto fight. I didn't think he was justifying this hype that was around him, but he proved me wrong.
That's an absolutely fair point, Kurt. Yeah, that's a fair point.
I think the whole tagline, the world's most avoided boxer. I think it's a line that boxers use. I mean, Paul Williams used the same kind of thing, didn't he? He's a big, he's absolutely massive. Both guys, massive for the weight, throw a lot of punches. They're the type of guys who, they're not drawing big crowds, they're not making huge money. And they're the type of guy who, if you don't have to fight them, you probably won't. Not because, don't think you can beat them, but because you just don't need to. And they're going to give you a bit of trouble maybe for a few rounds. I mean, people said that Floyd Mayweather ducked him, didn't want anything to do with Margarito. Margarito, he was the type of guy who he'd fight anyone. If any of the guys, top names said we'll fight you, he'd be there tomorrow fighting. And that's the type I think that fans bought into. And this guy will fight anyone. Someone give him a chance. And he finally got the big fight in the Cotto fight. And he had it all to prove, I think. And I think with obviously the controversy that came later, it kind of took a lot of what happened away that night. But I think he had a hard career. Where he couldn't get fights that he wanted. He lost a few. You know, he had to learn a lot. He didn't, you know, have a amateur career or anything. So, you know, he was a very crude boxer, and he did get better, in fairness to him. You know, he was obviously never quick, but his incredible chin, his incredible toughness, the engine on him, the ability to, you know, not a lot of people can do it, the ability to throw 100 punches around continuously, keep coming and eat your shots and smiling at your opponent. I mean, you got to give him all the credit. He can do it, and you know, he showed that. And you know, as someone facing him, you know, whatever size, you know, a big guy at the weight who can take your best shots and smile. You know, I wouldn't fancy fighting that type of guy. And you know, I could see why a lot of people would rather just not face him. And you know, Paul Williams was the same. And like I said, he finally got the chance with Cotto. And sometimes you just got to wait to get the big fight to put yourself on the level. We've saw someone like Golovkin right now. He's just waiting and waiting for that big fight, and you know, to show the world what he can do. And you know, I hope someone like Canelo or Cotto gives him that chance. But Margarito was in that position, and you know, he had to prove it then, because if he'd, you know, as Dave said, a lot of people would have thought Cotto would have beaten him easily, and if he had just lost, that would have been, you know, who would have cared about Antonio Margarito after that?
When I stuck the fight on, actually, you know, it was the first time I watched it in about a year. Always good to have Manny Stewart, basically giving his foresight and his insider knowledge, so to speak. But he even said just before the fight started that, you know, Cotto couldn't win by basically boxing all night, and at some point he would have to stand and forced to fight. You know, you remember, I think at that time Cotto was actually even considered to have the best left hook in boxing. You know, if you look at the kind of body shots he used to throw and stuff. But you know, going into the fight itself, you know, it was, you know, Margarito was always a kind of slow starter. It was like a locomotive. You should have to put coal in the fire to try and keep, you know, just to finally get him going. By the middle of the fight, he'd be ready to go. But you know, Cotto basically his pressure was put on him straight away. But even though he was landing the flasher combos like the first 2 rounds, I just thought that Margarito, the way he started actually was far quicker than what he's done in the past.
Both fighters have said hello in round 2. Margarito hammering Cotto to the body in the corner.
I figured this would get to this about the 4th round. It's happening earlier because Cotto cannot merely just outbox this man. The man picks most of the punches off.
No,
he's going to have to fight it.
Cotto with 2 good left hooks upstairs. Margarito drives him back with the right hand.
Unbelievable. They took a round to warm up.
And this is the fight that everyone expected to see.
Yeah, I thought early on in the fight that Cotto tried to get the jab going. He tried to get the jab going and stamp his authority, but there was something about Cotto throughout the whole fight. I thought he really struggled with the physical strength of Margarito right from early on. And Margarito, we know the type of guy he is. A lot of volume, hunts you down, hits you hard and often. And that's what he was doing to Cotto. Cotto couldn't really find the spaces. Early on, he had a little bit more success, but as the fight went on, as we'll look at, obviously he started to struggle. But he was throwing a lot of swiping shots, trying to get the little left hook off, and he did okay, I thought. Dave, I think you were saying that did you have Cotto winning the majority of the early rounds?
I did have him winning the majority of the early rounds, majority of the rounds in general, but as you said, Steve, it's a very important point. At no stage in that fight did Cotto ever look comfortable, did he?
No.
Margarito was on his case round after round after round. Even when he wasn't winning rounds, even when he wasn't landing, he was making Cotto work for every second. And you just knew. I mean, the writing was on the wall in the sense that he couldn't get Margarito's respect. Cotto couldn't. You know, he was landing some cracking combinations, some beautiful shots, and he just could not keep Margarito off him. And you just knew he couldn't do that for 12 rounds, no matter how well he moved. And his lateral movement was superb, some great footwork, but you know, Margarito was on him like a rash throughout. And you know, even the second round, Margarito landed with a right hand, and it caught Cotto's attention. Even then, you just knew there was going to be trouble in the long haul for Cotto.
For me, I mean, I don't know what everyone else thinks, but it kind of had elements of Maldrick Taylor Chavez, when the guy is winning the fight on points and he's looking, you know, he's doing all right, but the other guy he can just take what he's being given, and he keeps coming forward and he's getting in these little shots. I mean, Margarito, I mean, people, say he can't box very well, but his left uppercut was working a treat. And at one stage in the fight, I can't remember what round it was, but he threw about three in a row. That I think, I don't know if we'll talk about the controversy after the fight and what followed Margarito afterwards. And some fans to this day will say, he was cheating. Some fans will say he wasn't. The fact is, there's no clear proof he was cheating in the fight. And I still maintain, Cotto could have won this fight quite comfortably, in my opinion, if he just employed a clinch now and again. He didn't clinch at all in the fight. As fans, we don't want to see the clinching going on. We want to see two guys just going at it. But for Cotto, if he just tied Margarito up whenever he got inside, I think it would have been a lot easier fight. Whether he would have had the strength to be able to do that for the 12 rounds, like someone like Shane Mosley did a couple of years later against Margarito, I don't know. But I think he could have made it a lot easier for himself. But he allowed Margarito not only to just keep coming, but to basically be right in his chest. And he was laying on the ropes to get a rest. And the size of the guy and the engine on the guy, he couldn't get his respect. And it was a bit of I think after the midway point, even though he was winning the fight on points, you could see that he was a bit of he didn't know what to do. I think he was trying to land these, he could land the shots on Margarito's head whenever he wanted, but when a guy's smiling at you and keeps coming forward, it must be so disheartening. And psychologically, the pressure that he was putting him on, I mean, Margarito's not a Chavez in cutting off the ring, but he just keeps walking forward, smiling at you, still throwing uppercuts, left hooks. You've hit him with 3 punches square on the chin, and he just brushes them off. I mean, it must be so disheartening to a fighter, and I think that a lot of pressure was being put on Cotto. And as I think Jim Lampley was, he didn't really see much of a problem. He thought Cotto seemed to have the victory in the bag as long as he carried on. But whereas Manny Stewart, and like Andy said, he's missed now in the broadcast, but Manny Stewart seemed to know the writing was on the wall and it was going to be a damn hard fight for Cotto. And even Kellerman, I mean, I've been critical of him over the years, but I thought he was spot on in this fight. He was scoring it and he was saying, Cotto can't, he has to think of something else because he's not going to be able to do this for 12 rounds because the guy is just coming forward. And it turned from a boxing match where you'd favour Cotto, it turned into Margarito's kind of fight. He loves that, even if he's walking in and taking 3 massive punches on the face, as long as he's getting, his 2 punches in and he's closing the distance, he's happy with that. That's what Margarito loves.
I think the 6th round was sorry, Andy. I think the 6th round was when Tony's pressure really started to tell. Cotto's nose was bloodied, and he just had a look of a fighter who was struggling, didn't he?
Yeah, round 7, mate. Actually, I think it's just about
round 6. Cotto's nose was bloodied, but it was round 7 when Cotto was in huge trouble.
See that? There it is again.
This is the first round where I feel that Margarito is fighting on even terms with Cotto.
So even if I would be in Cotto's corner, I would be really
hurt, guys.
Cotto is badly hurt by a series of Margarito uppercuts. They hammered him. Margarito goes right back to the left-hand uppercuts. Cotto is in trouble along the ropes. Biggest trouble he's been in since the Ricardo Torres fight several years ago. Margarito stalking and stalking.
This ain't Ricardo Torres.
Cotto's looking for breathing room, and there is none.
Didn't he have a cut on the left eye as well, Andy? Was that like in the 5th or something?
That was later on. I think it might have been the round after that, mate, because as I say, I think it was about the 4th round. I mean, the pressure was absolutely immense because as Kurt was mentioning about the left uppercuts and that, I didn't think Margarito actually even employed a jab. He was mainly trying to kind of crowd or prod Cotto at the ropes or in the corners, stuff, which he managed to do from time to time. Then Cotto would try and kind of slip off, parry shots, maybe landed 2-3 punches, and then as the fight gradually wore on, it ran down to a kind of single punch. But the single punch was, it was a good shot. It did look like it wasn't damaging Margarito as such, but if you were a judge watching that fight, you were saying like, okay, I'm going to score that punch here, and you were kind of like looking for Margarito to kind of maybe land maybe 2 or 3 compared to Cotto's quality 1 or 2 punch combination. But definitely round 6, I did think Margarito really did start to get on top of Cotto. Was certainly landing the more punches. I did think Cotto was spending a wee bit more time in the ropes and that, and then I think it was round 7 for me was really the most telling round, because if you look at it, I think it was early in the round, Cotto complained about a clash of heads, and he kind of pointed his head or dabbing to it and stuff, kind of like looking to the referee. Margarito said, no, fuck that. He's straight in there. He didn't want to kind of touch gloves and stuff like that or say, you okay, mate? He's right in there. He's chopping right hands and stuff. And I did think, even though Margarito didn't take any notice, it landed a chopping right hand. I did think it really did root Cotto to the spot. But then, there was a three-punch response from Cotto as well. But as I says, again, Margarito, it hurt Cotto again with right uppercuts along the ropes. And as I said, the pressure got too much. Cotto then started to hold. I think that was about the first time in the fight. I think it was around about the 7th round that Cotto tried to engage, but basically by holding. But I think it was you, David, mentioned about round 8. Cotto's mouth was really hanging open. He was just basically popping off single shots. He was, as I say, he was sort of landing the more kind of cleaner shots, I thought, but the pressure remained just constant, epic pressure. We've discussed this type of thing before. I mean, some of us have done, nothing major in gym and stuff like that, but if you've ever sparred big guys and stuff, it really does, it's mentally draining for you. So you can imagine, we'll go into the hand wraps and stuff, but I do know before the fight there was contracted for 10 ounce gloves. I think that was then reduced to 8 ounce gloves. So if you can imagine, if he was loaded up, just how much pressure, or sorry, how much the more damage those punches could have been.
Well, you were talking about Margarito's game plan, and I think it was just to make Cotto work at a pace that he wasn't going to be comfortable with. I mean, if you look at Cotto's career, all throughout his career up until the Margarito fight, sometimes he could be quite lazy. He was very content at boxing at a pace that was comfortable for him. Like I remember when he boxed, we mentioned we covered the De La Hoya Mosley rematch a couple of weeks ago. Cotto actually boxed on the undercard. I can't remember the guy he fought, but it was a Panamanian, and it was pretty much a snooze fest. Cotto didn't look to impress. He just looked to box at a very comfortable, lazy type pace. And you could see from the word go against Margarito that he was, even, as Steve mentioned, even when he was winning the rounds, he was never liking what was going on. Margarito just made it so uncomfortable for him, and he was making Cotto work non-stop.
He was constantly retreating as well, wasn't he? He was constantly moving. Can he do that?
Fight.
Yeah,
the whole fight.
From the, I mean, I just felt he didn't. He gave off the wrong impression for me from the opening bell. He was constantly in retreat, and he didn't. I think Max Kellerman said at one point that he felt Cotto was the bigger puncher out of the two. It's just that Margarito could take the punches, but Cotto never in the fight, during the fight, did he look like he was confident in his power that hurting Margarito? Because as soon as the bell rang, he was on the move, boxing, which, that's fine, but can he? I mean, some boxers we know they can do that all night, but I just think that he just gave the initiative to Margarito to keep coming, and for a game plan, it's crude, it's simple, it's not the sweet science, but it's basically walk this guy down, take his power. You're gonna, he's totally believing that he can take the power, and obviously once he gets into the fight, he realises he can take all his punishment. Just keep putting pressure on him, even if you're not getting your punches off. The constant pressure of making him move constantly, he ain't gonna have the gas tank for him. Come the second half of the fight, that was when obviously they thought they could step it up, but I felt it happened a lot earlier. I mean, I think David mentioned he hurt Cotto with a body shot in the second round. And I just think, from there, it was always going to be hard. And I think once Margarito knew he could hurt him, and Cotto knew he could hurt him, and he couldn't hurt the other guy, you can have all the talent in the world, but if you're not able to move for 12 rounds, you can't keep the guy off you, and you can't hurt him. It's going to be a horrible night for you, to be honest.
I think, as you say, Kurt, I mean, we've all given Max Kellerman a lot of shit over the years and stuff, but I really did think he called it perfectly in round 9 when, right at the start of the round, and he says it in a kind of funny way.
Jim, I have Cotto up a couple points, but it seems to me that Cotto wants this fight to end. He wishes it was over already, whereas Margarito thinks the fight is just beginning. That Cotto, in a weird way, is in survival mode, wants to run out the clock.
It's interesting to hear your guys' views on the actual ending of the fight, because obviously Cotto was I think he was tired, he was hurt, he didn't have a lot left. But we talked about in another episode Jamie Moore when he was badly hurt, and he basically said, "Fuck it, I'm just going to go all out, and I'm going to go out my shield basically and get knocked out." With Cotto, he'd been in a lot of tough fights, and he has shown he in the tough, he'll give it his all, and he's hurt in the Ricardo Torres fight, and but in this fight he was hurt and he was tired. But the ending, I mean, he got a lot of criticism for it, didn't he? And the way Margarito basically just walked towards him and he went on his knees, and I think the towel came in afterwards. I mean, what do you guys think of that?
He's seen the dark side of Don Tony, by the way. That's what happens when you see the dark side of someone like that. Yeah, I mean, just going in, I was going to ask your scorecards actually as well at the same time. I think I had it level going into the 11th, and I think Cotto countered with a 1-2. That Margarito just basically ate it up. He just kept throwing. I think it was a left hook or something and a right uppercut. That seen the first. I think he took a knee first time. I think it was a left hook, right uppercut. And then
two uppercuts, I think, wasn't it?
Two uppercuts.
Well, there was two punches.
Was there right to the temple as well? Was there? That's what kind of forced him to the ground.
His face is all crimson, obviously. Then he gets up, and you could probably just see he didn't want it anymore. Margarito, he again landing uppercuts. He just backed off. I mean, he actually backed off from one turnbuckle, diagonally across the ring, all the way over, and then Margarito just basically marching toward him, and he just goes on his knee, and he basically nods. He shakes his head to his corner. His uncle or whoever it is gets in the ring, throws in the towel and stuff. As Kurt quite rightly says, I mean, I don't think I don't want to be shitting on him, but I just don't think, even though he did take that beating, I don't think he showed the real warrior spirit. I mean, we've seen it with Jamie Moore, as we discussed last week. Jamie's willing to stand in there, balls to the wall, badly hurt against Rhodes, stood there, even looked like he was going to get himself back into the fight. We never saw that with Cotto. Cotto was too happy to try and get a box off the back foot. And it was very kind of poetic that Manny Stewart called it about an hour before the fight that he just couldn't he couldn't win the fight by boxing on night. At some point he had to stand in there and really bang it out. And I don't think he did that. He really didn't do it. He just kind of seemed to try and tame the lion and back him off the ropes and stuff, and he just couldn't do it. I just don't think he had it in it to basically kind of stand there and trade with him.
Margarito short shots on the inside now, Emmanuel.
Oh yeah.
And Cotto goes to a knee. Succumbing to the pressure, much the way Zab Judah succumbed to the pressure against him last year. And that knockdown could ultimately be the difference in the fight. Yeah. Antonio Margarito has finally gotten his man to bend. Miguel Cotto getting beaten up by a bigger man.
It's over.
He's exhausted, and it's almost over. The punishment has accumulated to the point where Cotto has nothing left. There's no point in Kenny Bayless allowing this to proceed.
No, it's over. It's over.
And Evangelista Cotto's going to throw in.
I think he was just drained at the end, wasn't he? Like, he was physically and mentally drained. I mean, he lacked a powerful deterrent. He hadn't got the physical strength to keep Margarito off him, Dave. I mean, you can call it boxing off the back foot, but I thought at a point it became like Cotto was in like an active survival mode for a lot of the second half of the fight. He was throwing the shots without any real intent. It was to try and stop Margarito from throwing, to sort of keep him off him. It was like active survival.
Well, funnily enough, I mean, you mentioned the 7th round, and Cotto was in terrible trouble in that round, and he was looking to hold a huge round for Margarito. Well, I actually gave Cotto the 8th and the 9th. I thought he rebounded quite well. Tony was doing a lot of chasing, and again, as we said, making Cotto work. But Cotto was actually getting some clean shots and doing enough, I thought, just to win those rounds. Whereas Margarito's work, a lot of spells during those 2 rounds was ineffective. Cotto was peppering him with shots, so I just thought Cotto just did enough to win the 8th and the 9th. The big turning point was the end of the 10th round, where Margarito hurt him and badly hurt him. And I think that just took everything away from Cotto mentally and physically. And the 11th round, he just looked like a man who was absolutely spent, as you mentioned, Steve.
That was late in the 10th, wasn't it?
It was late, at the end of the 10th round.
Right uppercut or something.
I think it was, yeah. And Cotto was reeling, and he kind of ran away from Margarito. But I think after that, that must have been mentally so hard for Cotto, because I think he was actually winning the majority of the 10th round as well, if I remember. But,
it was the end of that round that kind of basically swung it in favour of Margarito.
Yeah.
Stewart had it the same way.
Yeah, and that must have been like such a real heartbreaker for Cotto. I think mentally and physically as well. He just looked like a fighter who came out at the start of the 11th, who was just so spent, and he couldn't keep Margarito off him, and I think he wilted.
I just found that the corner and the tactics by Cotto are just quite bizarre, to be honest. I mean, once you're in the fight with a guy, you can plan all beforehand, but you don't really know the true story until you're in the fight. You can gauge how hard he hits, how strong he is, etc., etc. But I just thought he was constantly peppering him to his head. He just didn't do anything. He never really once went for his body and thought, let's try and slow this guy down as well. Let's see if that works, because the punches to the chin are just not doing anything. He's just brushing them off. Again, they never really told him, don't let him inside or clinch, do anything, clinch him, spin off, get off the ropes. It was just like, he was going to the ropes, having a little breather, but it wasn't really a breather at all, because it just enabled Margarito to do what he wanted. I mean, Margarito is, he's an incredibly slow of hand, isn't he? I mean, he throws shots and they're so slow, but he was able to land like 4 straight left-hand uppercuts in a row. I mean, that just tells you everything. That Cotto was he was basically a punch bag for some of that fight, and he didn't have to be. If he can't move because he's tired, and I could understand him anytime, at least try and tie the guy up, and the referee obviously would have broke it up. It wouldn't have made for a great fight for fans, as we'd rather them fighting at it. But for the trainer or the man himself to, surely you could see that, I can't just sit here and, rest up because this guy's not allowing me to. I can't move around because, I haven't got the gas tank. So at least, maybe work his body, see if that works, and tie him up. I mean, it was just the same tactic over and again, go on the back foot, throw 3 punches to his head. The crowd go mad, but in reality, that's taking more out of Cotto because he's having to put these shots together, and it's just not doing anything. It might be ticking off the rounds, but he's not. You can just see that he's not going to be able to go 12 rounds, and you just don't see. Him. Obviously, he's not going to stop Margarito, so he's just emptying his own gas tank, really.
Obviously, guys, there was a rematch further on down the line.
Shocking.
What was shocking about it, Andy?
Well, come on. I mean, I'm a masochist at the end of the day, and I'm not a big Cotto fan, but Margarito shouldn't be allowed to fight. I mean, we've said it before. I mean, okay, we've been speaking about him recently over the last 2 fights that he's had and stuff, but let's just call it as it is. I mean, that eye, he looks like he's got one eye going to the shop, another one coming home with change. It's really, really bad. Come on. It's just basically Bob Arum working his angle and stuff, and managed to get the guy licensed to him to fly up from Mexico trying to get his eye checked and tested and stuff. I mean, the guy's had a lens surgically inserted into his eyeball. That just tells you how grotesque a sport we love and follow, by the way.
That fight was like on off throughout the week, wasn't it? First it was off, then it was back on, then it was off again, then it was back on. It was crazy stuff. And as you said, at the end of the day, he shouldn't have been in a box ring. I mean, he still shouldn't be. It's a disgrace he's still fighting.
But it's like, as we had Dougie Fisher on the podcast, and he said, the hate that Margarito got, he became this, like a Bond villain type thing. But the amount of money that he made more money in like a couple of fights at the end of his career than his entire career combined. I mean, so he played up to this villain in the rematch. He was really playing up to it. But you got to remember, Manny Pacquiao gave him a horrible beating. Shane Mosley gave him a horrible beating. It was good for Cotto to get his revenge, if you want to call it that. But to me, it wasn't the greatest revenge for him personally. He didn't put a beating on him. He outboxed him, and he actually did what he should have done in the first fight. He tied him up whenever he got inside. Just like Shane Mosley did. He landed his shots, tied him up, and it was a lot easier fight for him against obviously a much worse version of Margarito. But he got the win. But I think that was a fight. The first fight was a fight that Cotto really should have won. Looking back at it, but he didn't fight the right fight, and he allowed Margarito to fight his fight. And anyone who goes in with someone like Margarito and lets him fight his fight, you're going to be in a world of trouble, because the guy, you might not think he's that good, you might not rate him, but what he does, he's very good at, and he's one of those boxers who you wouldn't fancy fighting.
I think an immediate rematch would have been interesting, wouldn't it? I mean, I know Cotto was out of the ring. I think Cotto was out of the ring for a while, wasn't he? He came back against
was it
Michael
Jennings?
Michael Jennings, it was.
I think it's always a huge gamble. I mean, we saw it with David Price when he went in with Tony Thompson. If you lose the rematch, where'd you go then? I mean, the confidence of the fighter is absolutely dead, but you win, and it's a massive gamble. But I don't think anyone really. The first fight was them obviously at their best. No one really thinks of the rematch as much, do they really? But yeah, an immediate rematch, Cotto could have righted that wrong, but he was a big gamble.
we've seen it with Puerto Ricans before. Actually, I mean, after he takes that beating at the hands of a Mexican. What happened to Hector Camacho? Same thing. Edwin Rosario put him through 12 rounds of painful hell by Camacho. Many people think he was never the same fighter again. He decided, to box off the back foot. Never really kind of go for it. Very negative, mate. Very negative. And if you look at Cotto's career since then, okay, he's fought he's fought two of the greatest fighters of our generation, obviously. But he was well beat by Pacquiao. His career since then has really annoyed me. I mean, especially the latter half of his career, but he really did become the king of vacant titles. The Yuri Foreman fight, okay, it's not his fault that Foreman was injured, but it didn't make it any farce of a fight because Foreman wasn't all that great. He wasn't all that great a fighter. Okay, he pushed Mayweather close, but you could argue that Mayweather mentally was prepared fully because he was facing jail. The Austin Trout thing really did piss me off because he was well beaten in that fight, and I did think he did show a lack of class by not staying in the ring and basically speak about the fight and stuff, how it went down. I think he even claimed he'd been robbed or whatever. And then Delvin Rodriguez was probably relevant back when he fought those two great fights with Pavel Wallach. Remember on the ESPN Friday Night Fights card, the first fight especially.
Pavel Wallach, there's a name from the past.
I just think, with Cotto and the whole, people hate him. Or not hate him, but they criticise him. It's the whole entitlement issue, the whole, the same reason why a lot of people dislike Floyd Mayweather. You can be the best boxer in the world, but all your, diva antics, you don't really want to hear. And some of the shit he pulled, I mean, the Martinez fight, he had to have his name first on the poster, he had to come out first, he had to have this dressing room, he had to have all this. The way he made Daniel Geale, I mean, he didn't force Daniel Geale to come down. Geale could have said no. But the fact that he was the A side and he just did it all the more. This was a guy who complained that Manny Pacquiao asked him to come down to 145. He made the weight and said he was fine, and used it as an excuse afterwards. And after being in that position, he used the same power to other guys. And as you said, he lost to Austin Trout, but that was basically brushed under the carpet. It was like, well, let's forget about that. It never happened. And then it was like, let's fight, one-legged step-toe Sergio Martinez, and he was like a smoke and mirrors after that fight. Cotto was a good fighter, but as he moved up in weight, he had to be careful of who he fought because obviously he was a smaller guy. And I'll give him credit for the Canelo fight. Canelo gave him a lot of respect, and I think Canelo could have ended him, to be honest, if he really went for him. But Canelo gave him a lot of respect in that fight, I felt. And you got to say that's credit to Cotto and things that he'd done in his career. And I don't know when he'll fight again or whatever, but he's fought a lot of good fighters. And this fight, what we're talking about, is a great fight. And I think Margarito gets, obviously because of the hand wrap situation, he gets a lot of shit. But what we go on in that fight is that there's no proof that he had hand wraps, and I still maintain that Cotto could have won that fight if he used better tactics. It wasn't a case of Margarito went in there, hit him with a punch, and he was all over the place. It was his own fault, I felt, that he allowed a man like Margarito to get off on him, and it was his own downfall, I thought. So it was a great fight either way, and the controversy that followed, let's be honest, it made both men a hell of a lot of money in the rematch.
Well, you mentioned it. I mean, we can't avoid it anymore. In your personal opinion, guys, do you think Margarito was loaded up for that fight?
I don't think he was.
I suspect, I do have my suspicions. Just the way when every time he hit Cotto, I know Cotto was much the smaller man and Margarito was a lot bigger, but just seemed to be moving him. It seemed to be something different. Maybe in hindsight, it's a wonderful thing and everything, but I do have more suspicions there was more to it, the way he was catching.
I think there's nothing wrong at all. You've got to have suspicions because of what happened in the next fight. But at the time, I don't think you'd have watched that fight and thought, oh, he's hitting him and he's done a lot of damage. This is it's only in hindsight that you've got to look. And people started looking at Margarito's other fights. You mentioned the Lujan fight where the guy's ears destroyed. The Kermit Cintron fights, Manny Stewart, I think, is on record saying he doesn't, he trained Cintron for the second fight, the rematch, and he said he doesn't believe Margarito had anything wrong with his wraps at all. But people have gone over his career and said, look at this fight when he hurt this guy, and now his whole career is basically, I mean, now it's not. And people say, well, look at his fight since that fight, he hasn't stopped anyone. I mean, but
Steve
look at the guy he fought.
Steve Burns really kind of pushed the agenda. I remember reading an article with him basically saying because there was like red dye, possibly blood, at the end Margarito's hand wraps. That was proof that. Well, I think Cotto was kind of coming out saying that as well. Remember they had that face off in the second fight, and Cotto comes out with the iPad and showing, look, see this, look at this. I'm like, oh my god, man, leave it, let it rest. But my personal opinion, okay, we'll put it this way. I mean, people who say that Margarito didn't cheat, right? Okay, you've not got proof. People that say that Margarito did cheat haven't got proof. So either or of those two camps, then kind of turn around and say that Felix Trinidad did the same thing, right? But in my personal opinion, as I say, I've no proof either. Like everybody else, everything's circumstantial. I think he most likely did have.
I mean, it's like you said, there's no proof either way, and there's nothing wrong with thinking he did, because I can understand why. But in the whole broadcast, I've seen a guy who apparently he's wearing whatever he's wearing, these plaster of Paris, blah blah blah, these concrete on his hands. He has his gloves removed straight away. He's shaking hands with the referee. He's shaking hands with Bob Arum. He's shaking hands with all the officials. He's having his hands raised, all gloves off, just his wraps. It just seems like, is it likely a guy who's wearing wraps, the concrete, would be so eager to get his gloves off? To me, I mean, it's possible, but I just think it's a bit unlikely myself, not in front of all those people, shaking all the hands of the referees, with him as well, right next to him. If you think of the Billy Collins fight, the guy didn't take his gloves off. It was only when they went over and shook his hands with his gloves on that he noticed that the padding was removed, or the hair was removed. And I just think he might well have cheated, but I just think it didn't, to me, look, if you watch the end of the fight, if you got the broadcast and people listening, the way he was acting just didn't seem to me like a guy who had, was worried about people feeling his hands. That's just what it's to me. But, I can totally understand why people would be suspicious. I mean, something went clearly wrong for the next fight against Shane Mosley, and that's his own fault at the end of the day. People will look back his whole career, and he'll have to live with that because of what happened. But as I said, the flip of that is it made him a huge amount of money, and does he really care about that now? I mean, he's still living off it now. He's still hoping to get a Canelo fight. Why? Because the controversial and the character that he is. People, whether you hate him or you like him, people will want to see Antonio Margarito still, and that's why he's still fighting today.
That's a good point, yeah.
His manager, sorry, Steve, when you go.
I was just going to say, you can end up going into conspiracy theory territory, can't you? It's the same as when fighters are using PEDs, like we discussed Shane Mosley before. You're looking at it now backwards, saying, well, was he using PEDs for this one? Was so-and-so had his hands wrapped for this one? It raises the whole questions, but you can sort of go into conspiracy theory territory. I know one thing it didn't do. It didn't hurt Miguel Cotto's earning power, because even though this was his first loss and it tarnished his reputation at the time, I mean, you look at the Pacquiao, you got Mayweather, you got your Martinez, you got your Alvarez, this big Rock Nation contract's worth, $40-50 million. Miguel didn't do he did okay financially wise after the fight, even if Margarito was technically scrimping a little bit in comparison.
Yeah, this is true. But the thing is, what the fuck did Rock Nation know about boxing?
Not much.
Again, for this whole hand wrap situation, the blame's got to be put on HBO as well. I mean, they aired the documentary, the Billy Collins documentary, and then what do? They put Antonio Margarito on pay-per-view against Manny Pacquiao, earning him $4 million plus. I mean, what example is that? I mean, you can say a guy served his time, blah blah blah, but PEDs, weight cutters, people take things like that. People even smoke a bit of weed and they get in trouble. But when you go in the ring with hand wraps, again, I don't believe he did have them against Cotto, but whether you believe he did it or not, if you go in the ring with hand wraps, that's a man's life, you're dealing with, and, a 1 year ban, it's not acceptable, is it? Let's be honest. But HBO were happy to fill his wallet. They were happy to do it again for the Cotto rematch. I mean, so you got to look at them, and where's the morals with them?
Do you remember? Do you remember when he went to go and fight Pacquiao and they had the 24/7 series? Obviously, they were mocking Freddie Roach with his Parkinson's and stuff. But remember Brandon Rios walked in with this big fucking slab and they sat it on his hand and they started taping up as a joke running about his hand and stuff.
Yeah, and it all played to the character, didn't it?
Yeah, the bad guys here.
I think the most, just going back to the hand wraps issue, in my lifetime, the most obvious example of loaded hand wraps was when Glenn Catley fought that South African guy, Dingen Tobela. I'm not sure if you remember that, but after Tobela knocked Catley out, he celebrated after the fight, and you could see his wraps. It was like a rock on his knuckle. I mean, I don't think there was anything overtly wrong in the Margarito Cotto fight. You know, I think, as you mentioned, if it had never been discovered prior to the Mosley fight, I don't think anybody would have raised an eyebrow on any of Margarito's fights. But obviously, because of what happened subsequently, people, kind of cast, aspersions over his previous fights. I mean, you can argue and you can speculate till you're blue in the face, but there's no hard evidence to suggest that that Margarito, had anything, was untoward in the Cotto fight. But at the same time, conversely, was it really the first time Margarito or his trainer, who knows, was up to no good? As I said, you can speculate till they're blue in the face, but at the same time, people look upon Margarito as the villain, and they were happy when Mosley beat him, but then Mosley was caught with PEDs, and Mosley's not really looked upon as a villain, is he? But at the same time, if you're on performance-enhancing drugs, are you not equally putting someone's life in danger? I think maybe there's something more sinister about loaded hand wraps, but at the same time, performance-enhancing drugs, it's another dangerous issue, isn't it?
That's what I mean. Margarito his karma against Shane Mosley. An obvious drug cheat with the cream and the clear. I mean, that's just boxing for you, though. People happy to see his eye get destroyed by Manny Pacquiao. But would it be the same? Do we want to see James Toney destroyed and have his eye smashed out because he took steroids twice, or Shane Mosley? But it seemed that Margarito was given a lot worse treatment than a lot of other cheats, maybe because of the hand wraps. But like I said, he didn't actually use them in the ring. Technically, he's never been proven to use them in the ring. He got caught before the Shane Mosley fight. He never has been proven to use them in any other fight. So, and if he was using them against Shane Mosley, it wouldn't have made a difference, because Shane Mosley, had the beating of him, and he wouldn't have mattered in that fight at all. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of cheats, and I just think fans, they like to give the benefit of that to some guys and not the others. But I just think Antonio Margarito, his family, I just don't think they care at all, and I just don't think he's bothered about proving his innocence, because it's made him a lot of money. And has it really hurt his career? I don't think it has at all. It's got him big fights. He's made more money in those couple of fights than he ever did before. He'll probably still get another big fight, get a beating, and he'll go and walk into the sunset for the end. Cotto, did it really hurt him? He took a bad beating that night, but he took a bad beating against Manny Pacquiao. Does it really matter to him? He lost his unbeaten record, that's about it. But, it got swept under the carpet, because once he got caught against Mosley, Cotto was seen as the victim, and he was seen as, you haven't really lost that fight, he cheated against you, and, he lived on that. But, the fact is it was never proven, and when they fought, Antonio Margarito deservedly won the fight.
I think Kurt makes a good closing point there. As boxing fans, we are very fickle and very flexible in equal measures as to what we can accept and won't accept. My final thoughts on this one, though, regardless of all the shenanigans going on in and out of the ring, very interesting fight. Real solid performance from Margarito. Cotto obviously playing his part as well. And we always love to see the better fighters going up against each other. Anyone else want to add anything in before we wrap it up?
As Max Kellerman said, a modern boxing classic.
I'd actually forgotten how great a fight it was. It was great to look back up on this again. Some superb action. For any of our listeners who, for some reason, hadn't seen it yet, definitely check it out. And for other listeners who have seen it, but like myself, hadn't seen it in a couple of years, definitely check it out again. It's definitely worth watching.
And you don't have to get involved in all the hand wraps. Just watch it and enjoy it as a fight too. Really good fighters. At their best, giving it everything they got. And whatever you think of either man, just enjoy the fight for what it was. It was a great fight, and it's one that you can always get out and watch. And he had everything, and the crowd, it's always great seeing a fight in Vegas where the crowd are really up for it. Too many fights over there, the crowd are not into it, but when they're up, standing up and they're cheering, and especially when you got that rivalry as well, it just makes for a perfect fight.
Final words from Kurt Ward there, guys. Dave Lee and Andy Patterson joining me, Steve Wellings, for the latest episode of Punches from the Past. As the guys say, if you haven't looked up this one in a while, or you have never seen the fight, then go on YouTube. There's various versions. There's a Spanish language version, a Russian version, think there's a English language version knocking around somewhere, hopefully, maybe not on YouTube, but go and look it up anyway. And if you have any comments or any thoughts or any feelings about what we've said or missed out or added in, then hit us up on Twitter or over on the Facebook page and let us know what you think about this one. Also, coming to your ears very soon on a Sunday evening is the Boxing Asylum Nuthouse podcast. Don't forget to join us on YouTube, 8 o'clock UK time every Sunday evening. And we'll catch you again with another episode of Punches from the Past coming very soon. Thanks, guys. See ya.